So let us, welcome Professor Michael William, as he will be, giving a talk on Dvaita philosophy. The last
Thank you.
talk was on Shankaracharya's Advaita philosophy. So now we have a very interesting, contrasting view. Professor William is a fellow of Austrian Academy of Science in Vienna. He's also a fellow at the University of Leiden. His research areas primarily include Dvaita philosophy and also Nyaya Vaisheshika epistemology. He is currently engaged in preparing a critical edition of Vatsayana's Nyaya Bhashya. He has many important publications to his credit. I don't want to waste time giving the list of those publications. So welcome, Professor William. So over to you now.
Thank you. I just need to share my screen. I hope you can see everything. Okay. It should be the correct. Okay, you can see everything?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so this is my my PowerPoint presentation. So first of all, thank you, Professor Chakrabarty, for inviting me to speak today. I was very happy to give a paper on Dvaita Vedānta, or Madhva Vedānta, as I'm usually calling it. So the title of the paper is Consciousness and Knowledge in Dvaita Vedānta, the Theory of the Witness, and the Sanskrit term that I translate as witness is Sākṣin. So this is going to talk about, obviously the Madhva Dvaita idea of Brahman and the general theory of God, but also specifically their epistemological theory of the Sākṣin, which I think is, we're working on a lot of different aspects of Dvaita philosophy here in Vienna, but I think that this is one of the most interesting. This is one of the most challenging and interesting theories, so I want to talk about it today. Okay, so as has been introduced, I guess, so my name is Michael Williams. I'm currently affiliated with the Austrian Academy of Sciences, which is based, of course, in Vienna. My current project actually is entirely to do with Vedanta and with Navya Nyaya. And the title of the project is Truth, Knowledge, and Metaphysics in Three Traditions of Vedanta. And in case you're wondering, the three traditions of Vedanta are Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and of course Dvaita Vedānta. So we're looking at the three main schools of Vedanta that were operative in the medieval and early modern periods, particularly in South India. So our research tends to focus on the south of India. As the title suggests, we're looking at the relationship between theories of knowledge, between epistemology and metaphysics in these traditions, particularly from about the 16th century onwards. The project is hosted at the Institute for the Cultural and Intellectual History of Asia, which is one part of the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna. And it's funded largely by the I hope you can see this, but there's actually a link here, and this is the project website. So if you're interested in what I'm going to talk about today, you can also look and see what kind of work we're doing, and also get a list of our publications, I hope. Our colleague Markus Schmuck, he focuses particularly on the thought of Vedanta Deshika. I've recently published a lot of material on Madhusudana Saraswati, or I think was just being discussed. But our main focus, in a way, our main philological focus is Vyasatirtha. So Vyasatirtha, who I would assume you probably have heard of in some way, he was a member of the Madhva, which is another way of saying the Dvaita school of Vedanta. According to our best dates, and these are the dates given by Krishnamurti Sharma, who is still the preeminent Madhva historian. He lived from 1460 to 1539, roughly the same as the Navyanayika Raghunatha Shiromani. And he was a Kannadiga by birth. He was a member by birth of the Madhva tradition. And he was, many things to many people. He was a philosopher, a poet, and a prominent political figure in South India. So our work approaches Vyasatirtha primarily as a philosopher. Actually, we're focusing on, as I say, on epistemology, his epistemology at the moment. But he was also a poet. He didn't write, so far as we're aware, in Sanskrit so much, but he wrote in the Kannada vernacular quite extensively. And he was also the guru of Purandaradasa and Kanakadasa, who are two of the most important figures in the Haridasa movement in the 16th century. And besides all of this, he was an extremely prominent figure in South India. So the recent research that has focused on Vyasatirtha has been to a large extent driven by an interest in his standing as a political figure in South India during the 16th century. And I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But as I say, on the project, we're approaching Vyasatirtha primarily as what I would call a philosophical theologian. So Vyasatirtha undoubtedly was primarily a theologian. He believed that his primary concern was to interpret scripture so as to correctly understand the nature of God, of Vishnu, Narayana, or Brahman. But in the sense, if you look in the Nyayamrita, then in every section where he uses scripture, he always gives a philosophical defense of his concepts also. And he was deeply trained, particularly in Navya Nyaya, in the thought particularly of Gangesha Upadhyaya and his son Vardhamana Upadhyaya. So his work is of interest, I think, also to theologians, but also to philosophers, given how highly philosophical it is. Yeah. Okay, and I thought I would show you a picture briefly. This is somewhere I visited recently. This is Nava Vrindavana Island, which is near Hampi in Karnataka, of course. There are 9 Vrindavanas, or 9 tombs on this island. One of the most prominent tomb on this island is Vyasatirtha's Vrindavana. So as you can see, it's larger than the other tombs. It emphasizes his prominence as a member of the Madhva tradition during this period. And as I say, it's an island in the Tungabhadra River, just off just not so far away from Hampi, the modern site of the capital city of the Vijayanagara Empire. Okay, so Vyasatirtha and the study of Indian philosophy. Vyasatirtha's work wasn't really studied in so much depth in the 20th century. Obviously, there's been a continuous tradition of interpreting his work in the Madhva tradition since the end of his life. There's been traditional scholars continue to write very important commentaries on his work. But among Western scholars or scholars outside of the tradition, there wasn't so much interest during the 20th century, which is strange given his massive importance to the development of philosophy during this period. So since 2015, roughly, this has started to change dramatically. So Western philosophers are increasingly becoming interested in Vyasatirtha's thought. This interest has been driven in these countries, in the USA and Canada. These scholars are particularly interested in his historical importance as a religious leader and state agent in the Vijayanagara Empire. So Vyasatirtha was really the first of the Madhva philosophers to really obtain status for his tradition in the Vijayanagara Empire. He was particularly close to the Emperor Krishnadevaraya. The exact nature of his relationship with Krishnadevaraya is disputed, but we know that he had a lot of influence. And the scholarship that we find in the USA and Canada in the last 8 years has really focused on his historical role, his historical importance. And if you want an overview of that, actually, Valerie Stoker, who is a scholar from the US, has written an excellent overview of the epigraphical and biographical evidence that gives us insight into his life. As I said, we're focusing on Vyasatirtha as a philosopher, and our main focus is on the Tarka Tandava, which I could translate as the death dance of logic. This work is probably Vyasatirtha's the last of his major works, and it was written against Gangesha Upadhyaya. So Gangesha, as you probably know, was the author of the Tattva Chintamani, which is usually taken to be the foundational text of the Navya Nyaya school. And actually, in one of the manuscripts, the Tarkatandava is known as the Mandikhandana. So it's known simply as the refutation of the Tattva Chintamani. So it's mainly written as a critique of Gangesha Upadhyaya. That having been said, it also brings in critiques extensively of the Mimamsa schools and also of the Advaita school of Vedanta. He also critiques Sri Harsha, for example, a lot in Tarkatandava. So Vyasatirtha's thought was really, this is one thing that I've tried to emphasize in my research, which is that Vyasatirtha's thought was deeply shaped by Gangesha's. So he was a critic of Gangesha. He wrote the Manikandana, the Tarkatandava, mainly as a critique of the Tattva Chintamani, but he was also deeply influenced by Gangesha's thought. And Gangesha's arguments deeply shaped his critique of the Advaita school of Vedanta, of course, which we see in the Nyayamrita. So that's an overview of the kind of work we're doing on Vyasatirtha. I now want to talk about, so just give you an overview of Brahman in the Madhva school. Vyasatirtha believes that Brahman is Vishnu Narayana. So this is well established. Vishnu Narayana could be translated simply, besides being a personal name, Vishnu Narayana is what we call God in the Western tradition with a capital G. So Vyasatirtha says at the beginning of his Nyayamrita, for example, Nikalaguna Nikayam Nityaniraduta Heyam. He describes God as, in other words, the substrate of all positive qualities, who is simultaneously devoid of all flaws. The main positive quality that the Madhvas ascribe to God is his swatantrata, his being independent. So they take it that God is the only swatantra being in the entire universe of beings, and that everything else is paratantra, is dependent. And this is a very important differentiating mark for the Madhvas. And of course, he takes on earthly descent. It's just Vedavyasa is a very important descent for the Madhvas, but also Gopala Krishna, Rama, and so on. As you probably know, Vyasatirtha rejects strongly the claims of the Dvaita Vedantins. These are the scholars following Shankara, Mandana Mishra, and their followers. And the Dvaitins, as you just heard, claim that Brahman is non-dual impersonal consciousness. They claim that the world is mithya, by which they mean, for example, Sadasattva, Adhikarantatva, Pratipannavada, Trikalika, Nisheda, Pratyogitva, and so on. The 5 definitions of mithyatva that Vyasatirtha considers at the beginning of the Nyayamrita. And of course, the Madhvas strongly reject this and argue that the world is real. So they say, Yadrisham Brahmanah Satam Tadrisham Syad Jagatyapi. So whatever existence it is that the world has, or that Brahman has, that belongs to the world also. So this is what we focused on the last project. The Madhvas claim very strongly, like the other traditions of Vedanta, that God is knowable only through scripture, by which I mean primarily the Upanishads and the various different texts that support their interpretation. Inference, Vyasatirtha certainly admits the validity of inference as a pramana. He certainly argues that it has a strong role to play in the interpretation of scripture, as I said in my introduction. But ultimately, he believes that it is ultimately unable to prove things about God. And this is something that he demonstrates in the Ishwaravada of the Tarkatandava. So the Ishwaravada is by and large a critique of Gangesha's own Ishwaravada in the Tattva theologian who attempts to prove the existence of God using reasoning. And the Ishwaravada is Vyasatirtha's reasoning fails. It fails to provide a conclusive proof for the existence of God. So in the current project, what we're working on is how this Ishwaravada, how Vyasatirtha's critique of rational theology is grounded in much wider positions about knowledge, and particularly about the question about how we can trust the Veda as a source of knowledge, that is a pramana that tells us things about Brahman. So the Tarkatandava opens with a defense of what is going to be called Swatah Pramanyavada. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But for the Madhvas, as I say, the primary proof for the existence of God, for the nature of God, should come through the Veda itself. And the question Vyasatirtha is caught up with in the early chapters of the Tarkatandava is, what is the nature of knowledge? And in particular, how do we know that we know? So how can we recognize an awareness as being an episode of knowledge rather than of doubt or error? And therefore, this is quite caught up with the question of how can we trust the Veda as a source of knowledge about Brahman? So the Nyayikas, like the Madhvas, believe that we can know things about Brahman through the Veda in some sense, and that we can know things about ritual practice through the Veda. And the question that they ask is, how can we trust this? What is the epistemological grounding that allows us to trust the Veda as a source of knowledge, as a pramana? Okay, so, and this leads to the question, what is the nature of truth on knowledge status, which is the way that I translate the word pramanya. So ontologically, just before I discuss the nature of pramanya, this is how Vyasatirtha treats it in the opening chapters of the Tarkatandava, and it's certainly the Nayayika's view on the subject. Pramanya, which is knowledge status, or perhaps truth or validity, as it's been translated by other people, is usually a quality of an awareness. So an awareness itself is a guna, a quality or a trope belonging to the individual self. And if an awareness has this quality of pramanya, it can be called prama, which I'm just going to translate as knowledge. So the next question is for what is knowledge status? For the Madhvas, not necessarily for the Nayayikas, but for the Madhvas, knowledge status is yathartatva, which I interpret as the fact that an awareness conforms to or is similar to its object. In fact, the second theory, the similitude theory, is not so. It is represented in Madhva tradition, but only in one work of Vyasatirtha, which is his Upadhi Khandana Mandara Manjari. But the main theory, and the theory that is actually very similar to the Nayayikas, is that that which is given by Jayatirtha, which is that we have a conformity theory of truth. So if, for example, I'm having an awareness of the table in front of me, if the awareness attributes tableness to the table, then it's a true awareness because it doesn't overstep the nature of its object. Of course, if I identify it as a cow or a computer or something, then it's false. And this is roughly what I call a conformity theory of truth. It's a subtype, I guess, of correspondence theories of truth. And the Nayayikas, of course, have a very similar theory of truth. They say tadvati tat prakaraka anubhavak. This is Gangesha's own definition. So it's an experience that attributes a prakara, a predication content, to something that actually possesses it. Again, if it's a table and you identify it as a table, it's a valid awareness. Okay, and of course, to the Madhvas, they reject the Dvaita theory that there is such a thing as non-conceptual awareness. And they hold that any awareness ascribes some predication content to a subject, or a vishesha is what I mean by subject there. So, for example, this pot is blue, esha gatto nilaha. And the main question at the beginning of the Tarkatandava is, how do we detect knowledge status? And this, in a way, is just asking the same question as, how do we know that we know? So how is it that we come to believe that the Veda is a source of knowledge that can lead us to true knowledge of Brahman? How do we know that the Veda is a reliable means of knowledge? And on this point, this is a very important point in the history of Indian philosophy. There are two real schools. There are intrinsicism versus extrinsicism. And intrinsicism, I just translated as Swatah Pramanyavada, and extrinsicism is Paratah Pramanyavada. And as I say, these can be subdivided in two questions. The first question is, how do we know that we know? And the second question is, how is validity or truth produced in an awareness in the first place? Today, I'm only going to describe the first of these questions. So the extrinsicists, and in this debate, the extrinsicists are simply going to be the Navinayayikas. There are other schools of philosophy, such as the Baudas, I think, who argue for this, but this extrinsicist position in the certainly, by the time Vyasatirtha is writing, is represented by the Navinayayikas. And they argue that we need to confirm knowledge status through some external process. And for the Navinayayikas, this is always inference. So the form of the inference that they usually give to prove pramanya, that something is a valid means of knowledge, is at the bottom of the slide, and it says, idam jnanam prama pravritti samartya janakatvat. So this awareness that I'm having is a case of knowledge, since it generates pravritti samartya. So it generates success in action. It generates successful action. And the two examples I've given here are, my judgment that this is a diamond is true because it sinks quickly to the bottom of this glass of water. So I'm told that if you want to differentiate between a diamond and a fake diamond, one test is to put the diamond in water and to observe how quickly it sinks. So again, you have that this judgment that I'm having is true because because of practical success in practical activity. Another example might be my judgment that this is a solid object was correct because I was able to sit on it. So again, the fact that the judgment I'm having is yathartha, is object corresponding, is confirmed by the fact that I'm able to, it leads to success in practical activity. Okay. So the Naiyayikas claim that all cases where we identify an awareness as being valid, as being true, must be grounded in inference in some way. This inference might be explicit, so we might actually make the inference in our heads explicitly, or it might be implicit. It might be just that the inference happens automatically without us even really realizing it. But in each case, we need inferential justification. So intrinsicism, Swatah Pramanyavada, is the view that is represented by, amongst others, Vyasatirtha in Indian philosophy. And one of the major points I've been thinking a lot about this doctrine at the moment and what it really entails. And one of the major points is that there must be such a thing as non-inferential justification. So this is how Vyasatirtha actually argues for it in the Tarkatandava. He says, he agrees with the Nayayika. They both agree that there must be justification. For example, we must be justified in believing that the Veda is a valid source of knowledge of Brahman. And the wider point, and this is what you see in other critiques of the Nyaya position, is that we need to have some kind of non-inferential justification, otherwise there will be anavastha. So there will be an infinite regress. So if why should I trust my inference that the diamond falls? The fact that the diamond falls in water means that my awareness is valid. Surely I need another inference to sustain that, and then I need another inference to prove that one, and so on and so forth for eternity. So, and this boils down to the fact that there must be such a thing as non-inferential justification. So even if we might try to justify some beliefs through inference, there must be ultimately some grounds, the foundation of non-inferential justification that allows the whole process to work. This is interesting. I mean, we're not working so much on comparisons with Western philosophy at the moment, but one of the main contemporary theories of what's usually called phenomenal consciousness, consciousness that is self-aware, consciousness that entails, in a way it is, it entails that you have some awareness of being aware. And one of the main arguments for the existence of this, one of the main theories about why this type of consciousness exists, is because its role in providing non-inferential justification. So the phenomenal character of consciousness, its primary role is to provide non-inferential justification for beliefs and to render us rational epistemic subjects. This is quite striking, but as I say, I'm not going to talk too much about this because I'm not so familiar with these theories, but it is quite striking that one of the main theories of consciousness in modern Western philosophy is based on this fact. So intrinsicists, that is Swatah Pramanyavadins, argue that the same thing that detects an awareness also detects is truth or knowledge status. So there are various different positions amongst the different schools of Mimamsa and also amongst the different schools of Vedanta about how it is that we become aware of awareness in the first place. So it seems to be a fact that we can become aware of awarenesses that we're having. So if I'm, for example, having an awareness of the table at the moment, then I seem to be able to have a second order awareness. I am becoming aware of the table at the moment. And this seems to be a true awareness. So the intrinsicists argue that the same thing that detects the awareness in the first place is also the same thing that detects that the awareness is true. And this means that, in essence, that it is somehow innate to consciousness to detect the truth of what it becomes aware of, or detect the truth of the first order awarenesses that it becomes aware of. For Vyasatirtha, there's many different positions on this, but for Vyasatirtha, this means that the knowledge status is detected by the witness. And again, the term that I'm translating as the witness is the Sākṣin, is the Sākṣin in Sanskrit. So, the theory of the witness in the Madhva tradition is, on the one hand, a theory about the nature of the individual self. So it's a theory about the nature of consciousness. It's a theory about the nature of selfhood. It's also an epistemic theory. It's a theory that grounds the Madhva's wider positions on the nature of knowledge. And so the witness is, Vyasatirtha actually says at the beginning of the Tarkatandava that the witness is essentially comparable to the Nayayika's theory of anuvyavasaya. So anuvyavasaya is the apperceptive faculty, the faculty that detects inner awarenesses. So, for example, again, if I'm having, an awareness, I am happy or I am in pain, I can become aware that I'm having these awarenesses. And the Sākṣin is the faculty that is responsible for detecting these things. So it's the faculty that's responsible for becoming aware of awareness. And as I say, this gives an example of awarenesses that are non-inferentially justified. So the Madhvas, when they look to different theories of, when they want to give an example of an awareness that is doesn't need to be inferentially justified, they usually look to awarenesses like, I am happy. So if I am currently happy, it seems to be that I can't be wrong about that. So I can be wrong, for example, if I believe that the thing in front of me is a table. It might turn out later that it's, I don't know, it's a fake table, or it was all just an elaborate illusion or something. But I can't be in error about my own internal state. So I can't, for example, think that I'm happy and then it turns out later that I'm sad. So the Madhvas say that this awareness is incorrigible, is one way of putting it. So they say that it is abhadya. It is something that can't be defeated by a further awareness. They also claim that the witness's perception, so this is one, the witness's level of perception is inerrant, so it can never be in error, that it is clear, that it is distinct, and that it is resolute. So they claim, in essence, that the witness is an incorrigible, a perfect, an inerrant faculty of perception. And it provides us, as I say very clearly in the case of mental perceptions, like I'm currently in pain, I'm currently happy, it seems to provide us with indubitable knowledge about some aspect of the world. Okay, so what is Vyasatirtha's theory? Why is he a Svatah Pramanyavadan? So as I say, he's a Svatah Pramanyavadan because he believes that the witness, the same faculty that grasps our inner awarenesses, is the faculty that also grasps that these awarenesses are valid. And in the Tarkatandava, he begins by giving 3 definitions of Svatastva, of intrinsicality. And out of these, I think the second definition is actually probably the clearest to start with. So he says that in the second definition, that the witness always has the ability or the potency to know that some awareness is true. And what he literally says is the intrinsicality, that is the Svatastva, belonging to this or that awareness consists in the fact that it has the capacity to be an object of the awareness of the witness, which awareness has for its object the awareness that bears the validity that is to be grasped. In other words, the witness automatically detects an awareness as true unless there is something that blocks it from doing so. So what we're talking about here is, he uses this word Shakti, potentiality. So normally, under normal circumstances, the witness grasps an awareness as being true. So as soon as it detects an awareness, it automatically detects it as being true. So if I am cycling down the road, for example, I become aware that there's a car in front of me. I don't wait for inferential justification to implicit or explicit to act on that belief. I automatically take it as being true as soon as I register it. It's only when some extraneous factor, some external factor, gets added into the mix that I start to doubt this, or that I fail to detect it as being true. So, in other words, we can say that under normal circumstances, to be a Swatah Pramanyavadin for Vyasatirtha means to be that under normal circumstances, when we become aware of an awareness, we become aware of it as being true. It's only really if something extraneous, something external gets added into the mix that we get blocked from detecting it. Bias us to the detection of knowledge rather than error. So it seems to entail that under normal circumstances we detect something as being knowledge, and this is very important for Vyasatirtha in his theory of the Veda. When we're presented with something, we detect it as being true unless there's some good reason for being it false. Then, when we hear the Veda, when we understand statements of the Veda about the existence of Brahman, we take them to be true unless there is something to rule that out. And Vyasatirtha, as I'll discuss shortly, he argues that, of course, the Veda is aparushaya. It is eternal. It doesn't have any speaker. And since we can only doubt a source of verbal testimony, if we doubt something about the existence of the speaker, there is no grounds to doubt the Veda. And since there is no grounds to doubt it, we naturally take it as being true. And this whole exercise in rational theology that the Naiyayikas go, all these hoops that they jump through are actually false, are actually completely unnecessary, and we don't need to do that in the first place. But everything comes back to this theory of Swatah Pramanyavada and the defense of this. And one obvious question that we could ask Vyasatirtha is that if we have this inherent epistemic faculty, why is it that we often make mistakes? The traditional example is I'm walking along the road, I see a piece of mother of pearl on the floor, and I erroneously take it to be a piece of silver. So this seems to be a false positive. It seems to be a case where I take an episode of error, something that's clearly a false awareness, and I mistakenly take it to be true. So if we have this inherent, incorrigible epistemic faculty, why is it that we make mistakes sometimes? So Vyasatirtha's argument is that, so the witness consciousness is not the only level of consciousness that we have. The case of the mother of pearl illusion, for example, actually belongs to the level of material awareness. So in essence, because there are two levels of awareness. The first is the level of the witness awareness, which is, as I say, inherent, incorrigible, and perfect. The second is the level of material awareness, which doesn't have these qualities. So in essence, if we come across something that is error, if we come across something that entails doubt, or so on, or any of the faculties that would block us from obtaining true knowledge, then it must belong to the level of material awareness. And this is a very important distinction for Vyasatirtha's philosophy. It allows him to explain how we can have error even if we have a perfect epistemic faculty. Okay, so the fact that the witness, so like the Cartesian, so like Descartes, the madhus actually ground the perfect status of the witness in terms of the clarity and distinctness of ideas. So they say that the witness is the perception of the witness is always clear, it is always distinct and resolute, it doesn't suffer from doubt, and that therefore we can explain why it is, it can have perfect knowledge and why it can be inerrant. And the basic claim that the critique of the Navya-Nyayikas theory is that the Navya-Nyayikas can't really explain how we're able to act. So if there is no such thing as a witness, if there is no inherent epistemic faculty that can always detect the truth of, that always detects the truth of judgments, then how can we act? We would constantly need further and further justification, inferential justification, to be able to continue, to be able to act, and that would go on forever, and this would be, a vicious regress. The Sākṣin really explains how we're able to act decisively. So how we're able to come to an end of this process of justification and rationalization, and finally reach certainty and to act in light of it. Okay, so I hope that gives you a clear idea of what Vyasatirtha's theory of knowledge is. So this is the question which he begins the Tarkatandava with. His first priority in the text is to justify how we can have certain knowledge. The main question that he then goes on to from this is how to justify the Veda as a source of knowledge about God or Brahman. And so the Pramanyavada is followed with the Veda Aparushayatavada, the chapter of Tarkatandava, which deals with proving that against the Nayayikas, that the Veda is an impersonal source of knowledge. So it's a source of knowledge that's not created by any being, human or divine. So I explained Vyasatirtha's position. Vyasatirtha's position is that since the Veda is aparushaya, since it is not created by, because the only reason we would have doubts about verbal testimony is if we have doubts about the nature of the speaker. Since there is no speaker, we can have no doubts about it. And since in the absence of doubts, we tend to believe things because of the witness, we can believe in the Veda as a source of knowledge about God or Brahman, and also about how we should act, how we should how we should act in our daily lives. So one way of talking about what Vyasatirtha is doing at the beginning of the Tarkatandava is to say that the Madhva and the Nayayika's view represent contrasting strategies to ground the socio-political ideology of Brahmanism. So Vyasatirtha and the Nayayikas are obviously both Brahmanical traditions. They believe in some way in the socio-political ideology of Brahmanism. So they believe in Chaturvarna Ashrama Dharma and also in the validity of the Veda, perhaps in different ways. So Vyasatirtha's argument is that Swatah Brahmanyavada is the only effective way to ground this socio-political ideology. So all of these beliefs about the nature of the Veda and the nature of society can only really be grounded if we assume that there is a self-validating or an intrinsically valid means of knowledge. The Nayayikas, by contrast, ground it in ultimately in rational theology. They believe that we have to establish things about the nature of God to validate him as the source of the Veda. So we need to, and to that end, we need to engage in inference. We need to engage in anumana in order to prove things about the nature of God. So we need to certify. So according to the Nayayikas, we need to certify our beliefs using reasoning. So for the Madhvas, being Swatah Brahmanyavadins, this all seems completely besides the point. They argue that actually this potentially opens up a world of trouble. It opens up a line of objections from traditions outside the Brahmanical fold that we, like the Bauddhas and the Jainas, that we really don't need to engage in, that we really don't need to analyze. So rational theology, the project of justifying the Veda through reasoning, is entirely superfluous and potentially open to objection. So we shouldn't engage in it since we don't need to. Okay. And I think that brings me up to the end of the talk. So I'm going to pass it over to you and for questioning.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Michael, for drawing our attention to this important philosopher, because, you know, as I see it, I mean, in this part of India, I mean, Jayatirtha's philosophy does not really come into picture, you know, especially among the philosophers here. So we are more biased to, I think, either to Advaita Vedanta or to Nyaya. So, you know, yeah. So in that case, you know, you talk on Vyasatirtha and Vyasatirtha's, you know, rather complex relation with the Navanayayikas is very interesting. But before, you know, I'm just tempted to you know, share one or two ideas with you before I ask our participants to ask any question. You know, this intrinsicism that Vyasatirtha seems to defend, uh, this view is also defended by Mimamsakas, right? For them, you know, not every bit of knowledge is intrinsically valid, and they actually oppose the Nayayika attempt to validate every bit of knowledge in terms of some other inference, etc., etc. But then they do not. I mean, the Mimamsakas do not bring in the idea of Sākṣin in order to, you know, justify their version of intrinsicism. So I was wondering, you know, how and where to contrast these two versions of intrinsicism, the Mimamsakas on the one hand and Vyasatirtha on the other.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I was thinking of talking about it in the talk. But so the Mimamsa schools are split. Obviously, by the time that Vyasatirtha is arguing, you know, he identifies, and Raghavendratirtha identifies three main schools of Mimamsa. So you have the Prabhakara Mimamsakas, the Gurumata, you have the followers of Kumaralabhatta and Murari Mishra school, right? So their theories are differentiated by their theories of Prakasha. So we can call the theory of Prakasha, I just mean the theory of how we become aware of awarenesses in the first place. So for the Prabhakara Mimamsakas, obviously all awarenesses are Swayam Prakasha. They are self-aware. And so it's actually the awareness itself that would detect the validity, its own validity. For the Bhakta Mimamsakas, we actually detect it through inference, because this flow of Janatata appears in the object, and then we therefore infer that we must have had an awareness of it. And they start inference that detects this, that detects the validity. And then finally, for Murari Mishra, he's more like the Nayayikas, probably among the different schools of Mimamsa, the closest to Vyasatirtha himself. And he believes there's anuvyavasaya, some sort of inner perception that detects the awareness, and therefore must also be the same thing that detects the pramanya of the awareness. So Vyasatirtha, I mean, the Sākṣin, at the beginning of the Tarkatandava, he says actually the Sākṣin is just anuvyavasaya, but this is not true. So it can't be, you know, interpreted as a literal statement, because simply it's not true. I mean, the Sākṣin, according to Vyasatirtha, has many properties that anuvyavasaya for Murari Mishra and for the Nayayikas simply doesn't have. You know, it's inerrant, it's incorrigible, it can detect space, it can detect time. So it can detect external objects, also the ether, for example. So, you know, in grounding this, I mean, Sharma, Krishnamurti Sharma, the Madhva historian, I mean, he really said that this fully epistemologizes this theory. So what you get is a theory very much like, I don't know, in the Western tradition, theories emerging from Cartesianism and the Wiener Kreis, for example. You have a theory that of foundationalism, you know, this idea that all knowledge must be dependent, must ultimately rest on insight that is incorrigible, inerrant, you know. And the Madhvas always invoke this idea of aham sukhi, for example. I am in the state of pleasure. Aham dukhi, for example. You know, these inner states that seem to be incorrigible, and they say, okay, well, everything must be all of knowledge must rest on this theory that that there is knowledge that is simply incorrigible, inherent, and so on. So, and in a way, you could say, okay, so unlike the Mimamsikas, they almost have a foundationalist theory of knowledge, or they veer towards that in many circumstances. So,
yeah. Well, one more thing, about this idea of Sākṣin. I was just wondering. The Sākṣin detects the validity of the knowledge. Now, is this Sākṣin different from the knowing ego? Is it something like Husserl's transcendental ego that, some kind of supervises over the different cognitive experiences, possessed by the knowing ego, the knowing cogito? What's the status of this Sākṣin?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. Actually, I was meeting with some Madhva scholars. We've been talking about this theory. It's very. So the Sākṣin is identical with the essence of the individual self. So it is the Atma Swarupa. It is consciousness. It is so when we speak of myself, I'm Michael Williams, but this is my body, this is my temporary existence, but I also have a soul, an Atma, and this. To speak of the Sākṣi is ultimately to speak of something that is the individual self, but it also has different modes. So it's described both as the Swarupa and as the Swarupa Indriya. So it's the sense faculty that is identical with in a way with the individual self. And the Madhvas say that there's a relationship with Savishesha Abheda. Savishesha Bheda. So we speak of these things as being different. We speak of the Sākṣin, and we speak of the essence of the individual self, and we speak of the inner faculty, the faculty that grasps awareness. But we speak of them as being different, but really they're one and the same thing. And it's only due to the action of these visheshas, these differentiating, these things that allow us to speak and think about things as being different from one another, allows us to do that. So I think this is one of the most interesting things. It is a theory of consciousness, and it's also a theory of, an epistemic theory as well. So.
Right. Good. So, can I request the participants to ask any questions or comments or clarifications to Professor Williams? Please come forward.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good
Yes,
afternoon.
go ahead.
Sir, I have a question that does Sākṣin observe only internal states, like I am in pain, I am happy, or external objects outside my body, that is the pot is on the table, this kind of observation?
This is a very important question, and I think it's one of the things that differentiates the Madhva theory from the Naiyayikas. So the Sākṣin is, as you say, responsible for the perception of internal states. It's responsible for the fact that we become, aware that I'm in pain, I'm happy, and so on. But it is also responsible for external states, for perceptions of external things. And this is something, Anuvyavasaya in the Nyaya tradition could never be responsible for. For the Madhvas, one of the things it apprehends is time. So it apprehends kala. So the Madhvas believe that we can, the Sākṣin is a perceptual faculty, and they believe that we can perceive time. So for the Nyaya Vaisheshika tradition, we can only infer the existence of time. And the same goes for space. We can only infer the existence of space. It's only a theoretical postulate. For the Madhvas, it's something that we directly intuit. It's something that we directly perceive, and the explanation they give for this is that we experience it through the Sākṣi. So the same goes for space, and also for a certain form of the ether, the sound conducting substance. So, that is one of the major differentiating properties of the witness from the Naiyayikas and the Vyavasaya is that it can experience external objects. And I think the Madhvas believe this gives us a better explanation of how we're able to come to know things about these objects. They think that the Naiyayikas' attempts to infer them are actually kind of weak, and that if we just postulate that we can perceive them directly, then it's actually a much stronger theory. about how we come to know them.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question:
Thank you.
if we are having a functioning Sākṣin, then how the error in our vision that is possible? I mean, there are several error theories regarding our vision in several Indian schools of philosophy. So in Dvaita philosophy, how they are consistently discussing the error in vision and also the function of Sākṣin. If Sākṣin is functioning, there should be no error in vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is one of the major challenges that faces the Madhva theory. Like you say, if we have this faculty that's inerrant, it never makes mistakes. So why do we make mistakes? I mean, it's kind of an obvious question. So the Vyasatithya says that all mistakes we have to attribute to a different level of consciousness. So we need to have, in order to explain how we can reach certainty, in order to explain how we can have a flawless understanding of certain things, we need to postulate the existence of the Sākṣin. But that doesn't mean that there can't be other levels of consciousness. And the Madhvas believe, perhaps this is comparable to the Sankhya view, that there is a level of consciousness known as prakrita jnana. So awareness, material awareness. And this is, when you translate it like that into English, it sounds very strange. What does it mean? How can you have material awareness? I mean, awareness seems to be something that is entirely non-material, but they postulate that this is manasa pratyaksha, so it belongs to the mind, which is better translated in this context as the inner faculty. This doesn't belong to the nature of the self. It simply belongs actually to the psychophysical complex that makes up, our body. Can become aware of these awarenesses, but it isn't. These awarenesses do not belong to the witness. So the answer is that these awarenesses that have to happen at a different, inferior level of consciousness. This is something that you find Vyasatithya doesn't discuss it so explicitly, but it's definitely in Jayatirtha's Nyaya Sutta when he's commenting on the Anuvyakhyana, for example. So he said, Madhu says, Yat kuchid vyabhichari syat darshanam manasam hitat. So whenever something deviates, Yat kuchid vyabhichari syat, whenever something is a case of error, darshanam manasam hitat, that must be mental perception as opposed to Sākṣi jnana. So that in brief is their answer.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Well, if you don't have any, question or clarification, let's end this lecture session here.
Okay.
Let me again, convey my sincere thanks to Professor Michael Williams. In spite of his very busy schedule in India, he has taken some time out to share his understanding of Vyasatithya, which is really something novel to us at least, and which probably needs a lot more work, a lot more research to decipher his works, decipher his philosophical ideas. So thank you very much, Professor Williams.
Thank you very much.